So the first thing that I want to point out here is the design of these devices, the build of these devices. Now the purple elephant in the room here is that the S6 and S6 Edge are made entirely out of glass pretty much, except for this aluminum band that we have on the side. Now I don't care if they say that this is Gorilla Glass 4. They say that it can survive up to a meter drop onto a rough surface 80% of the time. What does that even mean? Well, I've seen that it doesn't mean too much because there's been a lot of drop tests all over the interwebs. And I've seen that both the S6 and the S6 Edge have the propensity to crack. So I think that the M9 will have to take it in terms of durability because I have seen drop tests of this as well, but it does fare better. You do get some dings around here in the case, but overall, I think that it might be a smarter choice if you don't want to have cracks all over the place. There is one thing that I noticed between the S6 and the S6 Edge though, is that the S6 Edge I feel a little bit less worried about dropping. The reason for that is that there is a discontinuity here on this aluminum to where it meets the glass. It kind of creates a step. It becomes easier to hold in the hand. That rounding also helps as well to get my thumbs around. You can see on the M9 as well, we've got a bit of a step here, and that does help with gripability. The one that's probably going to fare overall better without a case is the M9, but for the S6 and the S6 Edge, if you don't want to carry a case and you want to keep them thin just like they are, I'd probably get at least some type of a skin, a zag skin, something that's going to absorb some of the force when hitting the ground. I think that the bands will fare pretty well, but you're going to at least want something for impact absorption. So choose your poison. It really just depends on what type of a look that you like. Don't get me wrong, that glass does have a nice effect to it. This is black, but depending on how you turn it, it kind of looks bluish. It's sapphire black. Then the M9 comes in a couple of different colors as well. You can see that we've got this gold trim here, and then this is silver. We've also got a darker type of metal as well that's brushed. And then I think there's one that's just silver. I think that the M9 feels heavier to me in hand. You can see that the M9 is just a little bit longer. As for width, they pretty much feel the same size. Now in terms of the button layout on both of these devices, I feel that Samsung has the edge here. They've done a much better job. You can see on the M9 we've got both volume buttons here and also a power button, so I'm never sure what I'm pressing. I kind of have to count and feel around to tell what I'm pressing. So much of the time I'm trying to push the volume down button and I end up hitting the power button. That's incredibly annoying. To say that I'm watching Netflix and I'm trying to change the volume, I'm accidentally turning off the display instead. That's happened countless times. So on the S6 and the S6 Edge, you've got the power button here, then nothing else, so I know exactly what I am fishing for. Then you've got the volume buttons that are well out of the way, so this is a much better design, makes a lot more sense. It's easier to press those buttons. You can see that those buttons are protruding well enough. That is the same for both sides here. Very deliberate buttons. But unfortunately on the M9, it feels like the volume buttons and the power button are almost flush. On the front of these, you can see that we've got those front-facing speakers, and I want to talk a little bit about those in a little bit. Whereas on the S6 and on the S6 Edge, we've got a home button that also acts as a fingerprint sensor for unlocking the device. On the bottom, we've got pretty much the same things. You've got a micro USB charging port and your headphone jack. On the top, we've got an infrared blaster. Then on the back, we've got our cameras, which I will talk a little bit about later on, but you can see that the one on the S6 is protruding quite a bit, and that does concern me because if it hits the ground, I feel that even though this is sapphire, maybe it'll crack. I think Android Authority pointed out that they were trying to take some nice shots of the thing, and it went bam right on the pavement or whatever it was that they were resting it on, and it cracked the glass here. So there's always a danger when you have a protruding camera. Otherwise, we've got a dual tone LED flash here, and you've got a single LED flash with a sensor, the heart rate sensor, the stress sensor. There's a lot of things that they have going on with this sensor here. So again, I think it just depends on what you're looking for. Both of these are pretty nice to me. I think that these devices offer vastly different things. Now let's move on to talking about performance. We've got the Snapdragon 810 SoC inside of the M9 and the Exynos 7420 that's inside of the S6s. So when looking at benchmarks, I can see that the S6s take the overall edge in performance. I'd like to point out that the S6 has LPDDR4 RAM, and we've also got faster storage. This is UFS 2.0. So benchmarks are cool and all, but what really matters to me is the actual performance that I can see in daily life. Now, I think that both of these phones are pretty smooth when going about their interfaces. I don't have really any complaints there. But what is really significant and what I notice is that the S6 and S6 Edge load a lot faster for game times. So here we go. This guy is well already done. And we're waiting, and 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 oh, there you are. You decided to finally show up and join the party. How lovely to see you. Now let's do it again with Riptide GP2. Dink. See how much faster it loads. For good measure, let's do it one last time with The Room. Dink. Done. Hello. There you go. So you see there's quite a bit of difference there in speed performance for loading games. I would think the UFS 2.0 storage for this one here. Now when playing games, I think that both of these devices are good performers, but my favorite way to test out how they're actually doing performance-wise, especially frame rates-wise, is by testing games in Game Bench, letting them duke it out for 15 minutes. I'll play the same thing in the same way for 15 minutes. And I can see that the S6 can get some higher frame rates. And here we've got Riptide GP2. You can see that median performance says 57 frames per second versus 40 frames per second. What median is it's pretty much the center line of the frame rates. So I'm going to bunch them all into a trend so we can better see what the behavior looks like. And you can see that we've got more times at 60 frames per second here on the S6s than we do on the M9. So I noticed this trend pretty much all throughout in playing games. I've noticed that HTC says that the max CPU score is 2 GHz, but it's actually capped at 1.6 GHz. I'm sure that's in part to HTC dealing with the overheating issue that we've seen talked about. It does get quite toasty. To be fair, this device does get quite hot as well. And on both of them, if I do intense benchmarking over and over and over and over again for 15 minutes, they're both gonna throttle. But just in general gameplay, I can see that the S6 takes the slight edge here, and that's surprising because we do have a lot more pixels. This is a 1080p display versus a Quad HD display. So I do declare the S6 the performance winner. Now let's move on to talking about another significant difference that I see with these devices, and that would be the displays. We've got an AMOLED display on the Galaxy S6 and an LCD display that is on the M9. This is 5.1 inches, Quad HD, 577 pixels per inch. This is insane, the level of detail that we see on this display. So 1440 by 2560. Then when looking at the M9, this is a 5-inch display. This is 1080p. It's 441 pixels per inch. And at 5 inches, that's perfectly enough of a pixel density. It still looks really nice and sharp to me. I don't think it's 100% necessary still to have such a great pixel density. Although I'm happy to see that the performance of the Galaxy S6s really aren't suffering too much because of that display. So the thing that people always want to know about is how well are they calibrated? Well, we have not been hearing very nice things about the M9, unfortunately, and I did do some measurements. I did the same thing with the S6 Edge. What is really nice about the S6 Edge is that if you don't like the really saturated looking modes, you have the option to change how you want the display to look. So you've got basic, AMOLED photo, AMOLED cinema, and on the M9, you don't have any options to change the look of the display at all. It is as is, so that is a pretty nice option and something that I really appreciate from Samsung. If you want to go for accuracy in any way, I would stay with the basic mode. The basic mode is closest to the sRGB standard, and it does a lot better than the M9 does. So now I wanted to compare the calibrations a little bit. I set this to the basic mode. The first thing that I want to talk about is what white looks like, the white point. Now please ignore here what the white balance looks like. It's very hard to get the white balance correct as for what we are seeing, but I can tell you that what I'm looking at here looks yellowish to my eyes, and this looks very cool and greenish. So remember, this looks yellowish, not pinkish probably like it's showing on camera, and this looks very cool and greenish, bluish. So in the measurements I can see that the white point is not D65 like it needs to be for sRGB standard, but it's pretty close to it. I can just see that it's missing a little bit of blue. The color temperature is a little bit warmer than 6,500 Kelvin. So I do notice that my particular basic mode looks a little bit yellowish, but it's not too far from neutral looking. What we have on the M9 here are very cool looking whites. The color temperature is nearing 8,000 Kelvin. That's pretty high. I don't really like very bluish displays like that. I see that in terms of the balance of red, green, and blue, there's too much blue and green and just not enough red in there. Unfortunately, because that white point is so off, you do have a kind of a greenish looking color cast to all the colors. That's something I don't observe here on the Galaxy S6. I don't think that the colors look too awful though. It's just not my cup of tea. So that's going to bring me on to talking about the gamut of both of these displays. They both are hitting sRGB in terms of the gamut. That is for the basic mode here. And what I like is that Samsung is not oversaturating the colors in their basic mode. It looks very sane. The saturation points are not all jacked up and all over the place. Now that's somewhere where HTC does some interesting things. They like to tweak the colors, they like to add saturation, they like to change the hues around. So again, I don't think that the colors look bad, but it's just not close to anything that is accurate if that's something that matters to you. If all you care about is an effect and you like how this display looks, then more power to you. The one thing that I can see with both of these is that the gamma is not accurate. The gamma is too high on the Galaxy S6. Now what happens when you increase the gamma is that you make an image more dim and you also increase saturation at the same time. So that would be the one thing that I can tell is not entirely accurate here. But otherwise, I think the basic mode reaches the sRGB standard pretty closely. Now as for the gamma on the M9, it looks like they're trying to implement a kind of an S-curve, which is supposed to add contrast, make the image pop, colors pop. So nothing about what's going on with the M9 looks like it meets any type of accuracy. It really is supposed to be for the effect. So I would give the look of the display to the Galaxy S6s. Now if you want to know a little bit more about what these other modes are, you've got AMOLED photo, which is a wide gamut mode. You've got a broader range of colors than you have on the basic mode here. You still have that same warmish white point. This is the mode that I tend to like to keep it on. I've got a bit of saturation there, but not too extreme. And the white point isn't all bluish. Then you've got AMOLED Cinema, and you can see between going from AMOLED photo to cinema that the white point changes. So this white point is purposefully bluish. It's a graded type of an effect. Then you've got a very wide gamut, and then Samsung really pushes the saturation on top of having a wide gamut. And then they take the gamma, and then they really boost the shadows, and they pull down on those highlights, and it has a very pronounced S-curve to add a lot of contrast. Shadows look very dark. I think you lose a lot of detail in shadows, unfortunately, with this mode. But it's an interesting effect. It's just not one that I would really recommend. But if you like really garish, oversaturated, insane colors and a lot of contrast, then this is probably going to be your favorite mode. Otherwise, on the Galaxy S6s, the blacks are very, very black. The contrast ratio is nothing short of amazing on AMOLED displays, and it's only gotten better over time. With an LCD display, we don't have anywhere near the contrast ratio that we have on the Galaxy S6. So even though the blacks are really great on the Galaxy S6, there's one thing that I want to point out, and that is called black clipping. Now, please realize, I'm going to give you the image in the description, that depending on the brightness, this actually changes, the appearance changes. I had the brightness on a certain level, and you could see that you can't see past 9, everything past 9 is black. Well, when you change the brightness, sometimes you see further than 9. So the brightness scaling is just not so good with what we have here on the Galaxy S6, unfortunately. So what I mean by black clipping is that in shadows, if you're going to be watching a lot of darker scenes, instead of seeing a nice gradient from 21 down to 0, you lose all this detail here. Suddenly, shadows are just black instead of being in a nice gradient. So one thing that is nice about the HTC One M9 is that we don't get that black clipping. You can see that on the M9 it goes 21. You can see pretty much all the way down to 0 here. So shadows end up looking more natural on the M9, and I end up preferring watching content on the M9 rather than on the Samsung because of that black clipping issue. But again, depending on where the brightness is, it looks better sometimes or worse sometimes, so it's kind of weird. Alright, so let's move on to talking about these cameras a little bit. We've got a 20.7 megapixel camera on the back on the M9, and we've got a 16 megapixel camera here that also has optical image stabilization. We've got an f1.9 lens that's on the back and impressively on the front as well. Unfortunately, we don't have any optical image stabilization on the M9. We also don't have digital image stabilization either. So sometimes it feels like the camera on the M9 was supposed to be an improvement, but often feels like an afterthought. The Galaxy S6 is cool because we've got real-time HDR on both the front and the back now. So the first thing that I really want to point out about the Galaxy S6 is that I really like what Samsung has done with the interface. They have very much simplified it, made it very easy to find things. I know before you had pictures that were labeled, but when there's too many colors and things going on, it becomes hard to see what's happening or what you're looking at. So everything is nicely organized. You've got your auto pro mode, selective focus. Just the most important things are accessible right here. Then of course you can download some other things. You hit info and it tells you all about what each of the things do. This pro mode I really appreciate. You can set some custom presets. Of course the M9 has some pro features as well. That's one thing that I always liked about HTC's phones. I think what I've admired most about Samsung's interface here is that the camera is so easy to access. So even if the device is off, double tap the home button. In less than a second we've got the camera that pulls up. So we can try that again. And you can see just how fast that is, so you don't have to miss a picture anymore. We do have something similar on the M9 though that is implemented with the accelerometer, so if you take the phone, you see, oh okay, I need to take a picture, you can hold it upward, hold down on the volume rocker, it senses that you've moved the phone, and there you go, it accesses the camera very quickly as well. I think it's kind of gimmicky sometimes though. Sometimes it will work very easily and other times it won't. Right now it's working fabulously. So I do like the interfaces on both. They actually look quite similar. Very simple, so I think they've both done a good job here. When it comes to camera quality, especially by way of photos, this is where the S6 walks all over the poor M9. I have been hearing that there is an update that's supposed to be coming out to help improve the camera on the M9. I don't know how convinced I am by that. I have not gotten that update yet. I noticed that if they're in just broad daylight, that both of them can take pretty nice pictures. But just in general, I noticed that the S6 and also the S6 Edge do better in terms of dynamic range, better with skies, better with exposure. I see that the M9 seems to really struggle with exposure. So if you plan to use the M9 as a general overall point and shoot, sometimes you don't really know what you're gonna get. I've seen that if I take the camera out and I just point and take a picture, that I don't know what the exposure is gonna do. A lot of the times I notice that the image just looks way too underexposed. So I touch and try to fix that, and then I notice that parts of the image are overexposed. And then HDR is kind of a mixed bag of tricks. Sometimes it looks okay, sometimes it doesn't. So I am not a fan of the camera on the M9 really at all. When it does well though, I think it looks pretty nice. I think the colors actually look decently comparable to what I was getting on the S6 Edge. Another thing that I really noticed is if you try to zoom in on your pictures and look to see what the detail looks like, a lot of things look very watercolor-like. There's a lot of noise reduction, so there's overall not much detail in the image. Whereas we don't have the same thing on the Galaxy S6. I really think that the S6 wins here hands down in terms of camera quality. Again, people say that there's an update and things are improving, but I really am not so convinced. I'm also really happy with the S6's low light performance. The M9 does just okay, but I can see a lot of detail in the image in comparison. And due to that 1.9 aperture lens, the images definitely look a lot brighter on the S6 as well. The last thing to say in terms of the camera is that both of these do shoot 4K video, which is nice to have. It's a nice feature, at least that can be boasted about. Last year on the M8, HTC didn't even have a high enough megapixel count to do 4K video, so that's pleasant. But in my testing, I just thought that the 4K video looked just okay. It was nothing impressive. So I think that in so many ways that the S6 just takes it. That optical image stabilization really did create a nice, smooth, steady effect when I was shooting my 4K video, where everything just looked kind of jittery on the M9. So looking at these interfaces, I think that both, like I was mentioning before, are relatively smooth. So I'm pretty happy with the performance of the interfaces. I do notice on both of them that the lollipop features do drop quite a few frames. Samsung has simplified their TouchWiz to make it not as obnoxious as usual. They truly have simplified it. They say they've taken away 40% of the bloat. So you've essentially got less menus overall. I like it, but I've always tended to like HTC Sense a lot better. What I really admire about what HTC has done is that they've kept the lollipop features intact. So when I push this volume button, you can see I've got access to my priority mode. Priority, none, all. Whereas on the Samsung, they've decided to hide those things. You've kind of got to dig into the menu to find those features. There you are underneath sound and notifications. You've got your do not disturb mode, although you can access your do not disturb mode right here from your quick settings. This do not disturb mode is Samsung's kind of skinned version of the priority mode that we have on vanilla lollipop. You see the HTC is kept with their old appearance inside their app drawer. You can choose the grid size 3x4, 4x5. We've also got the ability to choose what the card layout looks like, so you can choose card view or grid view. Grid view would be HTC's own implementation for recent applications, where you can go underneath settings and use the card view that Lollipop has. So there you are with that. I do like blink feed, always like blink feed a lot more than what Samsung offers, which tends to be the slowest overall part of the interface and drops a lot of frames. So blink feed has always been my favorite here. Now what I like about both of these devices is that we have the theming option. So I can go and choose whatever. Here is Avengers, Black Widow. What I can point out in the theming is that Samsung has preset themes. It looks like developers or designers can go and make their own themes and submit them to Samsung, but you've got definitely more control in the theme region on the M9. On the M9, if you go underneath change or edit theme, you've got a collection here. There's ones that come on the phone, or they've got a theme store where you can download a bunch of themes for free. And then of course you can create one yourself, which is really awesome. So just by taking a picture of whatever, it will choose the color palette depending on the colors in that image, and then you can choose the icons, you can choose the sounds to go with it. So this was my kind of international and United States currency theme. It was just a random thing I called Theme 2. So you can change your theme on the fly and you can make it your own. So you've got a lot more control with the theming on the M9, and I tend to like it better than what we have on the Galaxy S6 because of that. So how about battery life? Well, I have to say that on both of these, I've been using them pretty faithfully and have not gotten through the day on either one of them. I have to charge each one a few times during the day. This one I charge 2 to 3 times. This one I charge twice during the day. It's hard to say exactly what the screen on time is for this one, but I get less than 4 hours of screen time all the time with this phone. Unfortunately, Google Play Services has been pretty rogue on this device, and I have not pinned down what is causing it just yet, so it's hard to say exactly what the battery life is like, except for I do know from what everyone has shared that it's not very good. It's not as good as the M8, and it certainly doesn't last me through the day. Now, if I were you, I would seriously think about investing in an external battery pack. This is the one that I'm using right now. This is the Keystone Plus. It's pretty cool. You can just plug it in like so, and it will charge it. Or, because this has inductive charging, I forgot to mention, you can set it on top. And you can see it starts charging like that. So I really have been using external battery packs with this phone because I find it to be very much needed. So the last thing that I want to talk about are these speakers on the front of the M9. Now, if you're somebody who is an audiophile, or if you're someone who watches a lot of content on your phone, it doesn't get any better than the front-facing speakers, the front-facing stereo speakers that we have on the M9. We do have a pretty decent speaker down here at the bottom on the S6, but I noticed when playing games that it's so easy to block that speaker, so half the time I can't hear the phone. That is not so with the M9. It sounds very nice, bright, clear. We do have that gimmicky Dolby surround sound, 5.1 channel surround sound. So underneath settings here, you see we've got two separate modes. We've got the theater mode and the music mode, very appropriately named. So the music mode, use it when you're listening to music, but this theater mode is what creates that interesting surround sound effect. And I wouldn't say it really sounds like surround sound. It sounds more like they've just got a wider stage, a wider sound stage. You've got sound that just feels a lot wider, and I think it creates a nice effect, but don't use this mode when listening to music. It sounds terrible. It sounds like you're plugging your ears halfway, and it creates a weird feeling on your eardrums. But I think this is really where this device excels, is these speakers. So if speakers really matter to you, this might be a real reason to look at this device. But the speaker quality on this one is not bad by any means. It's very loud. I can hear it during navigation. I have to turn it down because it's so loud. I'm honestly happy with both of them. But the speakers on the M9 really are something special. If these stereo speakers are not gimmicky enough for you on the M9, we also do have these curved edges on the S6 Edge. I think it's a nice effect, but honestly, when you're watching content, if you're in anything that has ambient lighting, you're gonna get a lot of glare. So that's one thing that is particularly irritating to me, so I do prefer the S6 better than the S6 Edge. You do have some nice cool edge features here, such as being able to pull top 5 contacts from the side. We've also got some fun edge screen features. The best one, I think, is night clock. So at nighttime, if you look over at your phone on the edge, you do see the time there, so I think that that has been pretty nice. Of course, you've got your information stream, so you've got access here only when the display is off to notifications and other things. But all of these things I have found to be not so necessary, and not really such an advantage over the M9, except for, yeah, it does look quite cool. So we are finally coming to an end. This is all that I want to say about these devices. Hopefully I've helped you decide which one you should go for based on the good, bad, and uglies between these devices. I think these devices are both nice, but as you've seen, we do have a little bit better performance on this one, a lot better of a camera. And as for the display on this, it is really nice, but it's going to just depend on what your taste is for colors. So please let me know which one you would prefer. These both have gotten very fingerprinty over the course of this video. So again, let me know what you think, which one you've chosen already, and why. Have a good night, everyone.